Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. I hope you had a restful and enjoyable holiday, and welcome back to our Sociology of Education module. You may recall from my introduction to Sociology of Education that I identified three central approaches within Sociology of Education: functionalism, symbolic interactionism, and conflict theory. You may also recall that I suggested all three of these approaches are similar to the extent that they all address the ways that education prepares students for society. The first approach, functionalism, does so by focusing on the roles that education plays in preparing students to perform functions that society needs to sustain itself, whether that function be as a teacher or as a school custodian or as a school board legal counsel. The second approach, symbolic interactionism, focuses on the interpretive processes at play in deciding which students end up on which career paths, whether those interpretive processes happen in a classroom, with a teacher interpreting a student's behavior and language and academic achievement, or in a guidance counselor's office, where a student may be given advice on moving through an academic or applied track, or perhaps in an IEP planning session, where a student's exceptionalities or giftedness are assessed in particular ways. The third approach, conflict theory, focuses on a so-called hidden curriculum that ensures existing social inequalities are reproduced, whether that hidden curriculum takes shape through a teacher's adaptations to the common curriculum. Perhaps the teacher feels one or more strands are too difficult for her students. Whether that hidden curriculum takes shape through a school's discipline policies, zero tolerance, for instance, or whether that hidden curriculum takes shape through a Ministry of Education's funding formula. It may be the case that those schools least able to raise money through fundraising are the schools that aren't getting the money they need. So, once again, each of these three approaches addresses, with its own points of emphasis, the ways that education prepares students for society. And taken together, they give us a language and a set of concepts, a kind of toolbox for thinking about the socializing function that education plays. This week's reading by Jean Anyon, Social Class and the Hidden Curriculum of Work, is also concerned with this issue. Anyon suggests that the schools in her study were stratified socioeconomically, and that this social difference meant the schools did very different work from each other in preparing students for future roles in society. The working class schools taught students how to follow rules. The middle class school taught students how to get the right answer. The affluent professional school taught students how to express and apply ideas and concepts. And the executive elite school allowed students to develop their analytical, intellectual powers. And in doing this work differently from each other, along a socioeconomic spectrum, argues Anyon, the schools were both preparing students for specific socioeconomic futures and reproducing the system that sustains socioeconomic inequalities. On page 90 of her article, she says, school experience, in the sample of schools discussed here, differed qualitatively by social class. These differences may not only contribute to the development in the children in each social class of certain types of economically significant relationships and not others, but would thereby help to reproduce this system of relations in society. In my introduction to the sociology module, I put it this way: if your parents didn't attend post-secondary education, then you are less likely to do so than someone whose parents did attend post-secondary education, and according to critical pedagogy at least, education itself is largely responsible for this. There is a very large scholarly research literature that documents and discusses this socioeconomic reality in education. It's a reality that is also recognized by school boards. For example, the Toronto District School Board uses what it calls a Learning Opportunities Index, and the Peel District School Board uses what it calls a Social Risk Index. Essentially, these indices measure the relative risks that students face in achieving academic success, with a view to allocating resources to where they are needed. Interestingly, the criteria used to assess these risks are clustered around family income and parents' level of education, two variables with a direct correlation to socioeconomics. So, to reiterate the core point here, both the scholarly research literature and higher level educational administration recognizes that socioeconomics correlates with student achievement. And the issue we're addressing this week is pulled from this widely acknowledged reality and asks, what part do we as educators play in this socioeconomically skewed process for preparing students to fulfill roles in society? What futures do we steer our students toward, and what are some of the ways we do it? In reference to this week's prompt, in what kind of school is your placement? Following anyon, is it a working class school, a middle class school, an affluent professional school, an executive elite school, or a combination of two or more of these? And in reference to the Britzman article, are there particular cultural myths you encounter in your placements that lend a sense of what kind of schools you're in? For instance, in your placement school, does everything depend on the teacher as a supplier of knowledge and as an instrument of control? Is the teacher expected to be an expert? And are teachers understood to be entirely self-sufficient? This is important evidence since, in connecting back to Anyon's typology of schools, the presence or absence of these myths can give you a good idea of what kind of school your placement is in.